Mark the Martyrdom anniversary of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. And Imam al-Sadiq stands as one of the most pivotal and important figures, not just in Islamic history and in Islamic politics, but in Islam as a religion as a whole. Not only as a spiritual leader, not only as a political leader, but also as the founder of a very vast and large intellectual library, which shaped the concepts we have today of aqa'id, of fiqh, of ahkam and akhlaq. And the life and teachings of Imam al-Sadiq still remain till this day for the madhab of the Ithna Ashari Jafari Shi'as as the sole point of guidance where we can refer back our traditions in order to further understand the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. And I'll go into the impact which Imam Jafar al-Sadiq had on the other madhabs in Islam, on the other schools of thought as well. But it's important first to understand the life of the Imam, his background. It is important for us to understand the key things which he taught for us to understand and to learn from, the lessons from his conduct and his akhlaq, and also the responses to some people who criticize Imam al-Sadiq. In terms of his birth and his lineage, of course we know him as Imam Jafar ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, born on the 17th of the month of Rabi al-Awwal, 83 years after Hijrah, and he's born in the city of Medina. And of course he's the son of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and the grandson of Imam Zain al-Abidin. And if we skip forward to the period of the Imamah of Imam al-Sadiq, it coincides with the most revolutionary and eventful era in Islamic history. It is the most turbulent, the most violent and the most uncertain time in Islamic history. We had the downfall of the Umayyad Empire during the Imam's life and during the period of his Imamah, and we had the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate, which came to power after the Umayyads. And throughout this period there was a lot of internal wars, there was a lot of conflicts, assassinations, political upheaval and change, and this would constantly bring about different governments into play and new rulers which were in power at the time. And therefore the Imam was forced to witness the rules and the reigns of different kings and different oppressive rulers. But one of the benefits of this for the Imam is that due to all these struggles for power which were going on at the time, he was left alone to an extent in order to propagate his own teachings and to further his own causes, which means he could carry out his religious duties, his wajibat, and he could peacefully carry on the mission of Rasulullah in teaching the religion of Islam, in building up institutions and schools and education centers whereby people could learn about their faith. And as a result of this is how he became known to become the founder and the #1 principal artist and architect of the Ja'fari madhab, the madhab which we all follow today. And the narrations which Imam al-Sadiq passed on by him and his father are said to be even more numerous than all of the ahadith which have been preserved from Rasulullah himself and from all of the other Imams combined. In fact, Allama Tabatabai, one of our renowned scholars, mentions that during the Imamah of the 6th Imam, Imam al-Sadiq, there were greater possibilities and there was a more favourable climate and situation around him for him to propagate Islam and to propagate religious teachings. And it poses a question and it makes us think, imagine if all of the other Imams, apart from Imam al-Sadiq, had the opportunity and the climate around them to allow them to spread the teachings. Imagine if Imam Ali was not plagued by the people who tried to steal the Khilafah from him, and he was able to spend all of these years in propagating and teaching Islam. Of course we know from the Holy Prophet when he says that Ali is with the Quran and the Quran is with Ali, Ali ma'al Quran wal Quran ma'a Ali, that Imam Ali is the secret to understanding the Quran. He is the gateway, as the Prophet says, Ana Madinatul Ilm wal Ali babuha. Imagine if Imam Ali, imagine if Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan, the situation in their times was more stable and they were able to tell us more, teach us more, provide us with more information about our religion. This is something to think about, and it's something which we should grieve and mourn about as well. And as we know from our belief in Imam, like going back, our Imams, all 12 of them, are divinely appointed, meaning that they are appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, was divinely appointed as the 6th Imam, after the martyrdom of his father, al-Imam al-Baqir. And as I mentioned, his position of Imam lasted 34 years. And in this 34-year period, he was able to establish a very large and vast network of students and scholars and educational facilities. And from this, he was able to then lay the groundwork for the fiqh from the Ja'fari madhab as we know it today. Imam al-Sadiq had the opportunity to expand and explain all of our religious concepts. However, there are a few which I want to focus on today because I find them the most beneficial and the most interesting. The first one is part of Usul al-Din, the concept of divine justice, meaning adl, the justice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam al-Sadiq further taught us this principle and explained it more so that we would have a better understanding of this concept. And what he also did was he countered some of the views of other madhabs who had a more extreme view regarding adala. He taught us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is justice. And he does not oppress the people who are in his creation. For example, in Al-Kafi there's a hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam where he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is too just to punish his servants for any sin which they did not commit. This is in contrast to, for example, the Christians who say that we may be punished for the sins of so and so, and only Nabi Isa, for example, can believe us of them. This is not correct, and Imam Sadiq countered this. And he uses the Quran as a basis for all of his statements. This aligns with the principle in the Quran whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, indeed Allah does not wrong the people at all, but it's the people who wrong themselves. The other concept which Imam al-Sadiq goes into and teaches us more on is the concept of imamah itself. And he elaborates on the necessity, the fact that we need an imam which is divinely appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after the death and the martyrdom of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Through this, he cites the verse in the Holy Quran of Ulil Amr, and he cites Hadith al-Thaqalain in order to prove that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are the true successors after the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He says, we are the ones to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you to be obedient towards. And we are the witnesses over the people, and we are the gates of Allah, and we are the path towards Him. Again, following on from the statements of Rasulullah, when he says, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Ali Babuha. In order to gain true knowledge, in order to gain perfection and closeness towards Allah, and to know our secrets, go through Ali. As a result, go through the other divinely appointed Imams. Go through Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and so on and so forth. Not just in Aqaid and Aqidah did Imam Jafar al-Sadiq teach us. He taught us fiqh, and this is one of his most beneficial contributions which he has blessed us with. Of course, he's the founder of the Ja'fari fiqh, the basis of the Ithna Ashari view on fiqh. And his rulings covered on every single issue. For example, in Salah, he gave us very detailed rulings and conditions and what makes the Salah invalid and what makes it valid and what are the mustahab acts during Salah. He taught us about zakat and khums, about charity. He would clarify the obligation of paying khums, paying 1/5 of our surplus wealth. And he would teach us about transactions, mu'amalat. He would give us the ethical, the correct way in order to do transactions, in order to do business, in order to do trade, and when you are writing up contracts. And these principles are something which we still use today. We don't abandon it because the Imam has passed away. The way in which we deal with trade and contracts is something I use in my personal life, in my job. Therefore, we can say that the legacy of the Imam and his teachings lives on in the beliefs of the Shia until this very day. Then we have the ethical and the spiritual and the akhlaqi teachings of Imam Sadiq. One of the big concepts which he tried to emphasize was tazkiyah. The other concept related to it was jihad al-nafs, purifying the self and getting rid of all the vices and the sins which are infesting a person's heart and takes them further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he tells us that jihad al-nafs is one of the ways to attain true ibadah, one of the ways to attain true worship. The Imam tells us the most beloved of you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the most pious. And the most honourable of you to Allah are the most abstinent from worldly pleasures, meaning the one who does not engage with the pleasures of the material world that much. And this, just like all of his other speeches and all of his other sayings and quotes, echoes the words of the Holy Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, he has certainly succeeded, the one who purifies himself, the one who works on himself before he goes to criticize other people. The more he finds flaws and faults in other people, first he has to reflect on himself. Al-Imam al-Sadiq transformed the city of Medina into a center, into a hub of learning, teaching thousands upon thousands of students, including some of the most prominent figures from the brothers in Ahlul Sunnah. We have Abu Hanifa, we have Malik ibn Anas, all of these people, their number one most prominent, important teacher was Al-Imam al-Sadiq. All of the rulings which they based themselves on and which they derived from and came up with their own interpretations, all stemmed from the knowledge passed down to them from Al-Imam al-Sadiq. He was their teacher, he was their source of guidance and knowledge and light. And this was a very important thing for Imam al-Sadiq to do. Why? It's something he dedicated his whole life into doing. And the reason for it is based on something he says. He says, seek knowledge, something I talked about last week. Because the pursuit and the fact that you are going to seek knowledge in itself is ibadah, is worship. And if you teach that knowledge to other people who do not know something, then this is considered sadaqah, this is considered charity. The sheer genius, the level of intelligence that Imam al-Sadiq had in all branches of knowledge, not just in Aqidah and Fiqh, is something which was known throughout the entire Islamic world. Hence why so many thousands of people flocked to come and study underneath him, until the amount of students which he had reached the number of 4,000. 4,000 students at that time travelled to go and be under the scholarship of Imam al-Sadiq. And his students as well, not just the teacher, but the students were able to compile hundreds of books, not just as I mentioned on Aqidah and Fiqh, but on different hundreds of other topics which were beneficial to people. They made books relating to science, relating to art, literature, poetry, amongst other different things. And other than fiqh, ahadith, tafsir, etc., which the Imam would teach to his students, he also taught them mathematics, taught them maths. He taught them chemistry. One of his students, Jafar ibn Hayyan al-Tusi, is one of the most famous scholars to do with maths and mathematics. And he's one of the students of Imam al-Sadiq. Someone who benefited from the knowledge of the Imam, someone who benefited from the teachings of the Imam, and in fact went on to write 400 books based on the knowledge which he had from Imam al-Sadiq. Therefore, it's undeniable, it is a truth, historical truth, that all of the great scholars of Islam were indebted and actually owe a great deal to the Imam. And must realize that the foundation of all of their knowledge and the wealth of their knowledge came from Imam al-Sadiq. We have Allama al-Shibli, for example, who talks about Abu Hanifa. And he says that Abu Hanifa remained for a very, very, very long time in the attendance of the lectures of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. And from these lectures he acquired and gained a great deal of precious knowledge on both fiqh and ahadith. Allama al-Shibli says, both the sects of the Shia and the Sunni believe that the source of Abu Hanifa's knowledge was mostly derived from simply associating himself with Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Therefore, anybody from any school of thought or any madhab that comes to you and criticizes Imam al-Sadiq first must understand that whoever they are getting their knowledge from is a mere humble student of the Imam himself. The Imam devoted, therefore, his entire life to the pursuit of knowledge and the propagation and teaching of knowledge. He never strove for power. He never put himself in the limelight and said that I want to be the Khalifa and I want to be the ruler and everyone must submit to me. No. He had humility. He was a humble man. And this humility began to anger the evil rulers that were existing at the time. They recognized that such a figure with such humility and such respect will pose a great deal of danger and threat towards them. And because of this great knowledge, the people started to gather around the Imam, giving him a very high level of respect, and this brought, of course, the envy, the hasad from the ruler at the time, the Abbasid ruler al-Mansur, who decided that the Imam posed too much of a threat to him and to the Abbasids as a whole. And as a result, throughout a long period of difficulties and torture which the Imam had to endure, he reached the martyrdom stage. There are different lessons that we can take from the Imam's life. Despite having persecution done to him by both the Umayyads and the Abbasids, the Imam remained steadfast. He focused on the intellectual resistance, the muqawamah of the intellect, rather than going out in an armed revolution the way that Imam Hussein did. And the reason for this is each Imam recognized that during their time there is a different need for, or there is a different way in which they must go about dealing with the enemies and dealing with the oppressors. During the time of Imam Hussein, of course, this was armed resistance, armed revolution against the Yazid. But during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, it was most important and most beneficial for him to strengthen the knowledge and the beliefs of the Shia so that they would be able to continue this belief on throughout further generations. He also engaged in very respectful debates with schools of thought which differed from the Jafari madhab. He would debate with them and have intellectual discussions, but he would do so in a respectful way. Unlike some of the people who claim to follow the Jafari madhab today, who when they debate with foul language and swearing and abusing people. Imam Sadiq never acted in this way. When he would debate his opponents, he would always do it with a great deal of respect. And of course, one of the other things which I do not have time to go into depth about was the Imam's emphasis on the concept of taqiyya. Something very important when the Imam says, for example, 9/10 of faith, 9/10 of religion is taqiyya. Something inshallah I'll talk about another day. But the last lesson I want to talk about from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq's life is the warning which he gives us. The warning against having good relations and friendships with monarchies and with kings. Note the very following words from Imam Jafar al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam al-Sadiq says that the one who is closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is furthest away from the cruel kings. The Imam emphasized in many different traditions this statement. For example, he quotes the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as saying, "Woe to you on being at the door of the kings and the people who are in their surroundings. The closest ones to the doors of the kings and their people are the ones who are furthest away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if somebody considers the kings as people who affect the will of Allah, Allah will deprive them from His fear and will make them go astray." Having relations then with a cruel ruler, a cruel leader, as well as having contacts with the people who are beneath him, is something which is considered as having a close relationship with the shaitan himself. And it is considered as supporting darkness and cruelty. And this is what Islam declares war against. Now it is important to understand what the Imam is saying here. And Imam Jafar al-Sadiq alayhi salam tells us that the person who is furthest away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is closest to the kings. Yet what do we see now? We see some people who claim to be experts in religion, who claim to wear the turban, who claim to wear the religious outfit, going and meeting with the kings, not just an ordinary meeting. Going to meet with the kings, shaking their hands, smiling, accepting all of the things which his family has done towards the people under his empire, and then signing a deal with the enemies of the Muslims. Imam al-Sadiq condemns this individual. Subhanallah. So specific. And we see these type of prophecies which the Imam talks about coming to life today. So this is something to be very aware of. Do not associate with the kings and the evil rulers and the monarchies, and stay far away from the people who associate with them as well. As you find with many of the Imams, due to all of the beautiful and amazing qualities which they had and the beautiful speeches which they delivered, a lot of people, certain extremists for example, would come and they would attribute divine qualities to the Imam. They would say, for example, in relation to Imam Ali alayhi salam, that astaghfirullah, he has the ability to give rizq and X, Y, and Z. So many other different things. And they done the same thing to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But the Imam, in response to this, cursed these people because they are from the Qulat. They are people who commit ghulu, and as a result commit shirk. And he would cast them aside and he would distance themselves from them. He says, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curse those who exaggerate about us, who give us more qualities than are allowed for us to have. We are but servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Imam says this in response to them. When we look at someone like Imam al-Sadiq, we need to value the treasures which the Imam left to us. No? After his death, for example, Abu Basira, one of the companions of the Ahlul Bayt, visited the wife of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam to pay his condolences. And when he goes to visit the wife of Imam al-Sadiq, he notices that she is in a state of grief and mourning. She's very upset because of the death of the Imam. And she says to him, Ya Abu Basira, if you were present during the last moments of the Imam's life, then you would have seen something very strange. When the poison had consumed the Imam, and when it went into his bloodstream, and when it caused him the most excruciating, horrific type of pain, and when he was about to breathe his very last breath on this earth, he suddenly opened his eyes, and he ordered the presence of all of his relatives to come near him. And they gathered, and they made sure that nobody was left out from this gathering. And the Imam, for the final time, looked at his family members around him and declared, our intercession will not reach those who take the concept of salah lightly. Meaning, the people who do not place importance on doing their prayers, on doing salah. And if the best example we can look at is Karbala. And we look at Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. Karbala teaches us that even when Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his companions were performing one of the most noble and beautiful deeds in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the act of jihad itself against an oppressor, when the time for prayer came and when the time for salah is called, salah became a priority even over jihad, even over saving the members of family from being slaughtered. Without prayers, there is no meaning or no value to our mourning for Abu Abdullah. There is no meaning or no value to the ziyarah which we do of Abu Abdullah, Sayyid al-Shuhada. This is confirmed to us by the Holy Prophet. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon us, tells him that the one who neglects his prayers on purpose is not from one of us, meaning not from one of the Muslims. Without prayers, our names therefore will not be recorded amongst the mu'mineen. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Anfal, those who perform as-salah and spend out of what we have provided for them, it is they who are the believers in truth. For them are grades of dignity with their Lord and forgiveness and a generous provision, meaning paradise. Therefore the person who neglects salah will not be resurrected amongst Rasulullah, will not be brought up and resurrected amongst the Ahlul Bayt. And to finish, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, of course, was a truly legendary figure. His teachings in aqaid, his teachings in fiqh, ahkam and akhlaq continue to not just guide us in this room, but hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world today. They all derive their belief from Imam Sadiq. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to follow in his footsteps and to remain steadfast on the path of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. And for all of the marhumeen and madhumeen and for the souls of the shuhada, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.